Another week in the preseason, another week of top five list. It's like bananas and mayonnaise. They just go together.
David, sometimes I really wonder what is wrong with you.
Some people actually eat that. And
I know my boss does that, and I harp on him all the time.
it just sounds disgusting. Apparently, we need to try this. But yeah, it goes together. Top five lists in preseason.
Today, we're counting down the top five front courts in the SEC. Plus, the SEC conference schedule was released this week. David has his top five preseason hype. Can't miss games on the schedule, and I've thrown a few in as well.
Yeah, top five, and more top five. Join us as we count down everything this week on the Hoop Southbound Show. So last week we did, top five backcourts. Let's go to the front courts now, talk about these forward centers and mix in the wings a little bit because, they are the hybrid spot on the court. So how they kind of factor in this as well. Maddie, obviously last week we started with honorable mentions. Let's do that again. I'll go ahead and kick us off here and with my first honorable mention. And my first honorable mention is I've got the Kentucky Wildcats. So I want to word this the right way, the best I can, and so everyone can kind of grasp this and why I didn't put them in my top five because I think it's arguable to put them in the top five if you're just looking at the paper. Kentucky got a ton of great front court players: Amari Williams, Brandon Garrison, Andrew Carr. You just heard that list of names, you're thinking to yourself, "That's solid. That's really solid." And it is. And you got big men and you got rim protection coming to this front court. Andrew Carr is a fantastic player, 13.5 points per game, just under 7 rebounds a night, 1.5 blocks a night. He is exactly the model of what Mark Pope wants on the offensive end of the ball when he ran his offense at BYU for a guy at the number 4 spot. And he also shot 37.1%. That's exactly what you want for this style of offense. But here's the thing. The 5 spot is the one area that doesn't fit. Last year at BYU, Pope's 5 man was Noah Waterman, and he would also run Ali Khalifa in that spot as well. And remember, we talked about the design of BYU allowed mirrored movement from the 4 and 5 spot off of zoom action in their offensive scheme. And all spots 1 through 5 have to be able to shoot the three in this offense. Waterman shot 37% last season at BYU and 38.9% for his career in college. He averaged nearly 4 3-point attempts a game and nearly 5 a game last year. Khalifa shot 31.5% from three last year and 35.3% for his career. Khalifa would attempt a little over 3 threes a night. But that's not Brandon Garrison and that's not Amari Williams. Great players, but they don't really fit the offensive scheme. Sure, Williams, if you just looked at the paper, shot 33.3% for this season. But if you dig a little deeper, he did that on 3 attempts for the entire year. So he hit 1 3 the entire season on 3 times shooting a 3-pointer. 2023 was his highest volume year shooting the three, and he shot 26.7% on 15 attempts for the year. He's a great rim protector, but not necessarily a fit for this model. And Brandon Garrison has never attempted a 3-pointer in his college career. So I guess we don't know what kind of 3-point shooter he is, but I would say it's probably because he's not a 3-point shooter, is how that would come across. So put Andrew Carr, who is exactly the guy that you want in this offense, aside. One of 3 things have to be going on in Kentucky. One, Pope thinks he could teach these guys how to shoot. 2, Pope is going to try something different this year. Or 3, Ainsley Allamore is the most under the radar transfer on Kentucky's roster. And he shot a decent percentage from 3 on the front court, but he is also in that power forward spot, that 4 spot. So it's a talented front court, and it's certainly worth a mention. I talk more about it, but they're not in my top 5 because it just doesn't fit. I do think this is probably the weaker spot when it comes to the fit in the offensive scheme. The backcourt's very good. The front court's got talent, but doesn't necessarily fit the offensive scheme. And you can check out more of that in the Kentucky portal video that we did. And we're going to talk more about it in the preseason preview as well. I know you don't agree with me necessarily on this Kentucky thing, and we'll get into that a little bit when that comes up in the top five. My second honorable mention, because I did two last week and I'm going to do two again. That to me is a team that's also flying kind of under the radar. It's Missouri. Missouri has to get a mention here in the category because probably no one would put them in a top five list because of the last two seasons, but things have changed a little bit in Columbia as far as talent for a roster. Part one, you brought in a lot of good front court freshmen. Four-star Peyton Marshall, who is one of the best big men freshmen in the country this season. You got another 7-foot freshman in Trent Burns. You got four-star and top 15 incoming freshman in Norm Boating, a small forward, and you have four-star power forward Marcus Allen coming in this freshman class. Very talented group of freshmen coming into Missouri. But then you also got what you got in the transfer portal. You got Duke's Mark Mitchell coming in from the transfer portal, and Josh Gray adds a little bit more depth at that center spot coming from South Carolina. He's not going to be a big time contributor, but maybe he's going to be like the upperclassman who leads, Peyton Marshall and Trent Burns until they're ready to take over the offense. But Missouri is flying a little bit under the radar because of what happened last season in conference play. And if it wasn't for this front court, being young and largely unproven, they probably would make my top five. Absolutely worth a mention. And again, Missouri is getting overlooked because of that 0-18 record in the SEC last season.
Yeah, for sure. Both solid teams. Like you said, I'm going to mention one of them here later on in my list. But like you said, Mizzou, I think, is going to be overlooked because of their last season. Um, but a lot of talent coming in. Like we always say, freshmen get a freshman, so it'll be interesting to see how some of those incoming end up doing. But I think they have a shot, at least to win a game this year.
They're certainly going to win a game this year. I would put solid money they're going to win a conference game this year. We're going to talk more about Missouri as it comes up throughout the course of this preseason and going into the year because Missouri, to me, like I said, it's unproven because it's transfers and freshmen who are very talented. But to me, like we know where the issue actually is with Missouri. And when I say the issue, the point of conversation, because I don't know if it's actually the issue or not. If, a lot of the preseason talk with Missouri is going to be, oh, Dennis Gates went 0-18 last year. So the conversation's not really about the roster talent in Missouri. And because there's talent on this roster, they had a really good transfer class and they had a really good freshman class. So where's the actual conversation? And I think most people, when we are talking about this overlookedness, it's centered around Dennis Gates right now. And we're going to have that conversation a little bit more. I won't talk about it. Won't bore anybody. I think most people know my opinion on Dennis Gates is a little bit probably more positive than what seems to be the conversation going around Twitter right now.
Yeah, for sure. Jumping into my honorable mention, I've got Florida, which may shock some people that they're not higher up on my list.
Yes, it does.
The big reason here is they relied a lot on Micah Hand-Longden last season. We saw what happened, kind of after his injury and the direction that this Florida team took. And that's the only reason that they aren't higher on my list. But they've got some guys that are going to be able to make up for that. You got Ruben Chinyule.
Yeah, Chinyelu, yeah.
Chinyule?
Chinyelu, I believe it's how you pronounce it.
Chinyelu.
I looked it up when I did the Portal series. I believe it's Chinyelu, but it's been I've slept since then since I pronounced it last time.
Yeah. I know we discussed it several times, so we'll get it right at some point this season. But we're still in preseason, so I feel like people should give us a little bit of grace. So Chinyelu, fantastic bring on for Golden and the Florida Gators. I think he is going to be a big contributor. Got Sam Alexis also coming in. And then you have guys like Alex Condon that stayed with Florida who know the program and are going to be able to point these guys in the right direction. So while I think they are going to be a good backcourt, I just don't know how it's going to play out because their main number one guy has been out with injury. It made me kind of reflect back to, and homer me all you want, to Trevor Brazile last season. He was coming back, everybody was excited. And then after injury, it was a struggle. So
Well,
I'm
Michael Hanlogden shouldn't be playing because he's on medical red shirt, and we're going to talk about this more because I have Florida in my list. So we'll talk about that more a little bit. I want to counter that point as we go through the list, but I would say also the other point of conversation is replacing Tyree Samuel in that front court. So that is worth a mention as well. I can buy into the element of unknown and relying on the idea of Alex Condon. I could buy that logic. There are some things in your list that we are going to talk about a little bit more, and I hope you're ready for that conversation because when you showed me your list this week, I did text you, what the actual heck? Um, so get ready for that. But one thing
ready.
we do agree on, if you want to talk about this jointly, is our number 5 team. And that is the Tennessee Volunteers. There were some major losses in the front court for Tennessee this offseason, but I still got them as my number 5 team, and you do as well. Let's go over the losses here. Jonas Aidoo transferred to Arkansas. Tobe Awaka transferred to Arizona. Those were your number 1 and number 2 guys at the 5 spot last year for Tennessee. So that's a big hit. That's a very large hit for the Volunteers. But what Tennessee has going for it is some really good transfers and a couple of young guys who didn't see a ton of floor time last season, but are nonetheless talented players. For those guys who need to step up, we're talking Cade Phillips, who saw sparse playing time for the Vols last year, mostly garbage time minutes. He was one of the top in 3-star prospects in the country last year, and he plays a very translatable and ferocious style of basketball around the rim. Very athletic, very aggressive style player. He's a dude with a lot of upside coming to this Tennessee team. I would imagine he's probably one of the lower end on the depth chart right now, but coming to his sophomore season, let's see how much Phillips can step up for next year. JP Estrella, one of the bigger of the 2 prospects we saw Barnes give a little more faith to as the season went on last year. We've also seen Barnes give this kid praise. He was one of the top 15 freshmen coming to the SEC last year. He's another guy who's going to see how much of a jump he can make for this sophomore campaign. But both the sophomore returners are guys with huge upsides. Maddie, any thoughts on the returners here since we both have Tennessee as our number 5 team?
Yeah, I mean, my big thing, like you mentioned, JP Australia had a lot of expectations on him last season. We didn't really get to see him live out those expectations
But he was
because, like,
third on the depth chart. Let's be fair.
yeah,
He was third on the depth chart because you have Tobe Awaka and Jonas Aidoo.
yeah,
And yeah,
that's where I was getting at. He was underneath Awaka and Adu, who both played phenomenal. So the playing time that we did see, I think, was fantastic for a freshman. I think if he had a little more reign and had a little bit more playing time, we would have seen a little bit more situational awareness. Just higher basketball IQ that comes with more playing time and more availability. So I think JP Australia is really going to step up this season. And I think it's going to be a good look for Tennessee.
I definitely think he's going to be featured a lot more this year. And I also don't think Rick Barnes would just let Tobe Awaka walk out the door, in Tennessee because it happened very quietly when Tobe Awaka went to Arizona. So I don't think Rick Barnes would let that go without having some faith in the guys in his front court that he has right now to contribute and the guys he was pulling out of the portal. So I do think that played a factor as well. And let's talk about that transfer market. Felix Okpara out of Ohio State. Okpara is very physical, solid player, should give Tennessee something at that 5 spot. Only 6.6 points per game last year and 6.4 rebounds. 6.4 rebounds is nothing to turn your nose up at. But he has a ton of rim protection with 2.4 blocks per game. He's just a sophomore, but he can absolutely make the jump for this upcoming year. He's played big time basketball against quality opponents in the Big Ten. A lot of faith in him, and he's got some attributes that Jonas Aidoo didn't have, especially for his aggression. He's a much more aggressive player than Jonas Aidoo was. And I know Tennessee fans are going to be, very excited about that because that was one of their chief complaints with Aidoo. We're going to talk about Aidoo a little bit more because I'm big on Aidoo, but Akpara definitely fits what Tennessee fans want to see out of that number 5 spot. And then the guy who's super exciting, Igor Milicic, at 6'10", he's a really good player, and you can put him wherever you want. He's really like Tennessee's version of Andrew Carr. He has guard skills. He can shoot the three at 37.5%. He converts at the free throw line at 82%. He averaged just south of a double-double last season at Charlotte, 12.8 points per game and 8.6 rebounds per night. Adds a little bit more rim protection at 1.1 blocks per game, and he can pass it. He can pass some a little bit as well, 1.7 assists per game. He is dynamic. He's going to be hard to deal with this season. He's very versatile. He can stretch the court, and he has guard skills. Very excited for this kid. Maddie, any thoughts on the transfers for Tennessee?
Yeah, so you mentioned both Felix Akpara and Igor Milicic Jr., which Milicic super excited about. We talked about a player last week in our backcourt video, Adu Thiero, who can kind of
Do
be
whatever he wants.
considered, yeah, he's a Swiss Army knife out there. And I think this is going to be the guy for Tennessee that's going to be able to do that. He's going to be able to put the ball on the floor. He's going to be able to rack up some assists, which we aren't used to seeing from forwards. Usually that ends up getting people
Lower
in
assist numbers
trouble.
there.
Yeah. So I think Milicic Jr. is going to fit Rick Barnes' system very well. And I think it's going to give them a lot more options, than just front court versus back court. I think it's going to help blend the two together beautifully.
Yeah, I think we're going to see him run out there a lot at the three, four in some stretch situations. It should be really interesting the way that Barnes plays with this, because he's got the talent that you can do multiple things with, multiple ideas with. He's very exciting and a very exciting prospect. And if you wanted to run small ball and five out, you could even put him at the five. There's even some notion that you could put him at the two if you wanted to in your backcourt. He can shoot like that, and he's got enough guard skills to do it. So he's very exciting. I think if he came from a larger program, he'd be getting a lot more hype than what he is, but he's already getting a lot of hype because he's this kind of talent. So we're going to see if this jump to the SEC is there. But he definitely makes Tennessee a very dynamic offense in the front court and can score in a variety of ways. And I think that's exciting, and something to definitely keep an eye out for the Volunteers. So let's hit the number fours here on the list. A team, I've got a tie for fourth, like I did for fifth last week. Call me a cheater if you want to, Maddie.
He was giving out participation trophies. Everybody is involved in the top five.
Everyone is involved. Everyone gets their love. It's very our generation of us, as the old people would say. So let's hit my two tied number four. So one team here, I'm very surprised you don't have in your list. Very surprised by that. And the other one, I know 100% you have them in your list, and there's a reason for that. So number four, we'll call it Texas A&M. Like I said, two teams tied here, both very interesting, the dynamic. For Texas A&M, they were in the top five list last year, I believe, for both of us. And they only lost one player in this front court, and that was a backup in their front court. So I've got them at number four for that reason. What Texas A&M does is rebound as a collective, and they are very good at rebounding the darn basketball. I don't think this team is going to forget how to rebound over an offseason. Aggies were number one in the SEC in rebound differential, rebound percentage, offensive rebounding percentage, offensive rebounding per game. They were second in the SEC in total rebounds and rebounds per game. They were third in the SEC in defensive rebound percentage. Solid rebounding front court. It's because they got a lot of contributing forwards who know how to rebound the basketball and can make a huge impact on a game, creating second chance points. And, one of those guys we're obviously going to talk about, Coleman, was an excellent player for Texas A&M last season, and he's going to continue to be a huge presence in this front court for the Aggies. 8.8 points per game, 5.6 rebounds a night, 57.3% from the floor. If he was a better free throw shooter, I don't know, this kid would be stoppable. That's the flat truth with Henry Coleman. And did I mention they might have even gotten better in the front court by adding Pharrell Payne out of Minnesota. 10 points per game, and he's also a good rebounder. No surprise there when it comes to the players that the Aggies gets. He pulled down 6 a night at Minnesota for the Golden Gophers, and he's a decent rim protector at 1.4 blocks a night. But Payne is Texas A&M's only real number 5. So while this is an amazing collection of forwards, not having that backup center is kind of a concern to me when you talk about all the great big men in this league. We're about to talk about one, and there's a lot of good big men in this league this year. So not having that consistency for a solid 40 minutes is a concern to me for Texas A&M. But the forwards presence is very good. That 4 and 3 spot, Texas A&M's got that covered, and to me, that's why they're my number 4 front court in this conference. Maddie, any thoughts on Texas A&M before I go to my next team on my number
To
4?
touch on A&M, they were in a draft of my top five, but I took them out.
Okay.
Mainly because last season they underperformed. And
They
like you
did
said, there
underperform,
hasn't
but they were
been
still really good in the front court.
they were. But in my opinion, the front court underperformed. We saw a lot more contribution from their backcourt. And like we talked about last week, A&M rebounds as a collective. So the question for me is the backcourt really going to matter as much when it comes in? Because like I said, I felt like they underperformed last year. I feel like they have something to prove to me, and that's why I ended up taking them out of my top five.
Okay, and I'm assuming you mean front court. You're doing the thing where I twist up and say back court when I mean front court. Is that what you meant in that last
I
sentence?
think so.
Okay.
I don't
It
know.
happens. I really do think that that is a that is just something that ends up occurring. So but like yeah, I get it, but the collective to me is very strong, and you don't create those second chance points for Wade Taylor and Boots Radford last year without this front court. So I think their backcourt thrives off of the ability to rebound the basketball from this. I would like to see a little bit more offensive production, but they weren't bad there either, and they have a lot of guys who contribute on there, and they fight for every rebound, and it's really just for a team that doesn't get like necessarily the best talent in the world. They do a darn good job of building that front court, and Buzz does some really, really good work there. If they had a big time number 5 guy, I would, and I'm not even talking about the backup spot. If they had someone even better than Payne, I don't know how they wouldn't be one of the best, like one or two. Like if they had a guy at the center spot who was just a dominant big man. If they had that, I don't know how you stop Texas A&M's front court. So that's what I wish they had because that would be the next step up for Texas A&M is getting that. But let's go to someone who does have one of the best big men in the country or in the conference this season. That's the Arkansas Razorbacks. Now, you may have noticed a theme here with a lot of my picks and my honorable mentions, even in the top 5 list for the backcourts last week. The more improving you are, the more likely you're to find yourself at the bottom of the 5 list or in the honorable mentions. Blame Evan Mia and Arkansas last season. And speaking of Arkansas, I've got their front court tied at 4. Jonas Aidoo, like I said, one of the best big men in the conference, Elite 8 Tennessee team, and he was a key player on that team. Last year, Aidoo led the Vols in rebounds per game, blocks per game. He was also a consistent offensive contributor, tied for second on the team in points per game and the third best for points per 40. That was a top 30 Tennessee offense last season. Granted, offense is the biggest criticism for Jonas Aidoo, but he contributed heavily, but it is the weakest part of his game. So it's a solid addition, and while he may not be like a key leader on this team in scoring, he's darn good, and he might find himself again in the top 3 this upcoming season for Arkansas as one of their top 3 scorers. And as an upperclassman, that makes it a stronger case for someone who's going to contribute in March. Then you go add 2 more transfers. Obviously, the Kentucky guys, Big Z and Aidoo Thierry, who transferred from Kentucky to Arkansas with John Calipari's move. Thierry, what can we say? Basketball player. You can put him anywhere. You can do just about anything you want with him on the floor. We've talked about it in the last 2 episodes. Started out his career as a guard. He's coordinated. He's athletic. He's kept growing. He's getting stronger, and he can play the 4 spot, and he can play the 5 spot, which we saw him do against Kansas. And you go stick him at the 3. Anything you want to do with Aidoo Thierry, whatever, it's on it. If he was a better 3-point shooter, lightning athletic. So let's see how much of that 3-point game is improved over the offseason for Aidoo Thierry. But the athleticism and the defensive ability is really, really solid. Then we go to Big Z. He didn't play a ton last year, but he's projected to have a breakout season this year. He can shoot the 3. He has size. He's good at the free throw line. Let's see what happens in year 2. He's got a little bit of athleticism as well. Someone you like as a 5 player and has the ability to stretch the floor. The only scholarship returner for Arkansas is Trevin Brazile. Last year was a serious disappointment for the Razorbacks, and they were some NBA folks, and I think we kind of mentioned this on the show, talking about what Trevin Brazile did back in 2022 may have been more on Anthony Black's ability at point than what Trevin Brazile what actually was as a player and an NBA prospect. There was some thinking about that. But we still saw some injury last year, so I don't think that question has still been answered overall. I don't know what. I think there's more doubt. I think there's certainly more doubt with Trevin Brazile than there was coming into last season after what happened. But take a look at the numbers. They're still not bad. He still shot 35.3% from three last year. He averaged nearly 6 rebounds a game and contributed 1.2 blocks per game. Pairing him up with another solid point like DJ Wagner or Boogie Flan may bring his game back to that next level if it was something like, Anthony Black playing at the point that raised his game. It's an interesting pairing with Big Z as well. Both guys that are athletic, can shoot the three and stretch the floor a little bit. Who is ever guarding at the four on Arkansas this season is going to have the ability to play some perimeter defense. So I don't think that cannot be mistaken. If you're going to play man against Arkansas, your four guy has to be able to play perimeter defense because Arkansas's got two guys who are probably going to play the four who can shoot the three a little bit. I will say this about Trevor Brazile. He gets a dumb fouls, and I was unbelievably frustrated at times with Trevor Brazile, and just what just seemed to be some just what are you doing moments. And that is probably one of my biggest criticisms with Trevor Brazile, and I think it impacted his game on the floor. He's got to grow out of that in this going into this junior season. And then we'll touch on the freshmen here real quick. Both wings for Arkansas coming in. You got the four freshmen and top 15, we got the two guys who are top 15 freshmen coming into the SEC this coming season, Billy Richmond and Carter Knox in this front court, who will be contributing to the front court out of that wing spot. Both guys super athletes. Carter Knox can contribute on defense, and he can shoot the three a little bit. Billy Richmond, if he improves his defense, he's an athlete, and like I said, he's a little bit of Ricky counts a highlight reel in the waiting for him coming out of that three spot. So I like Arkansas's front court. The unproven factor is what keeps them down as a number 4 team to me.
Okay, that's fair. I'll talk a little bit more about them later, but my number
Sure
four.
you are.
My number four, a little unexpected,
Oh yeah, it is. Let's talk about
but
this.
uh, but sit with me. Everybody, close their eyes.
Uh-huh.
Imagine your favorite team, one of the best in the conference, loses their big man.
Yeah.
They're the one of their highest producing men in the front court loses their minds. Is he still going to be great at this next school? Probably. So let's talk about South Carolina and Nick Pringle moving back home.
This is something. I need you to write this number down, okay? And it's 888 820-6684. And that
That a
number
biblical
is to
column?
the True Self Recovery Center in Northwest Arkansas. Because clearly you're on drugs, Maddie. What is your thinking? I really need an explanation on this. I'll give you credit. Last season, you called out Ole Miss's front court, and you're like, that thing is not as good as everyone thinks it is. So I'm willing to listen, but please explain this to me, like how you have South Carolina as one of the top over certain teams also I might mention in this list. So please explain South Carolina being a top 5 front court in this conference.
I mean, like I said, you got Nick Pringle coming in, amazing contributor in Alabama last year. One of the only, dare I say, highlights on the defensive end for that Crimson Tide team. Then you've got Jordan Butler, another guy who was kind of circumstantially not in a great place with his previous team. Coming in should have more support, especially from the backcourt section. You got Colin Murray-Boyles, who was a standout player for South Carolina last season, put them in a lot of good positions. And then you've got some others that stuck around, and Benjamin Bozeman's for dunk, and an incoming freshman in Aku Federico, who I think is going to be a surprising get for the South Carolina team. I think he's going to be a lot bigger of a contributor than people are expecting, just based off of the highlights and some of the information that's come over from, he's from Africa.
Mm-hmm.
So, about him. So I think my main thing here is going off of talent, going off of the system that they've already had with Colin Murray-Boyles, and then bringing in these amazing transfers. I think is the big thing for me on this front court.
So I get where you're coming from with Colin Murray Bowles. That is obviously the highlight for South Carolina returning next season because they lost a lot. And this was still, I will maintain, last year's team was not that talented for South Carolina. They were well coached. And that is for Lamont Paris, that was a great coaching job last year. A fantastic coaching job. But Colin Murray Bowles is not your whole front court. And that is one of my issues with this. Verdunk, you're talking about somebody who only put up 2.5 points per game and is going into his graduate season. This next year as a redshirt grad. Like you're talking, what was it, 6 years of college basketball for Busman Verdunk? So like I not much of a contribution in my eyes from that. Jordan Butler. I do agree, probably should have been starting a lot more and been put at the 4 spot for Missouri because Connor Vanover took too many of those minutes and you could have developed a lot more with Jordan Butler. I do agree that was kind of a mess with the usage of Jordan Butler, but that 16% shooting from three was a serious disappointment because what we saw at him coming out of high school was someone who could stretch the floor much better, from deep as someone who's really a stretch seven or a stretch five. He's just a hair under 7 foot, or he is 7 foot. Should have played a larger role. Nick Pringle, I agree, played some pretty good minutes at the highlights, especially the NCAA tournament where he stepped up. But like, let's not kid ourselves. That was the biggest issue with Alabama last year. And when I talk, we'll go into it a little bit more, but the 5 spot was desperately needed to be fixed in Alabama. And I don't know if Nick Pringle was the answer. He had to be the answer last year, but I don't know about the Nick Pringle situation. To me, this feels like this roster for South Carolina feels even less talented than last year's team. Cam Scott's probably going to be a great guy, but we'll go into South Carolina and some of the upside there. But it's almost the island of misfit toys for me in a lot of their positions. So I don't see how it fits, and it's going to be a lot of work for Lamont Paris, and he's an excellent coach, but from a talent perspective, I don't see that. I think you got a lot of guys who may have something to prove, and we're going to find out what those guys can prove next season. But I certainly would not have, out of your honorable mentions so far, South Carolina over Florida. That's where you lose me. Like if you were to have certain teams in your top 5 list, and there's going to be another omission that we really need to talk about, in your list. But if you were to tell me that you're putting South Carolina over Florida, I'm gonna look at you crazy for a little bit. But I'm gonna listen to you because again, last season you looked at the paper on Ole Miss and you thought this has a chance to be at least one of the top in the top half of front courts in the SEC. 2 games into the season, you were like, absolutely not. It's
Nope.
not. And sure enough, it got exposed. And outside of some shot blocking ability and that front court, yeah, there were some issues for Ole Miss. So I will buy that.
Yeah.
That is worth a listen.
I think the biggest thing for me is you're getting a lot of guys that are coming in that didn't really have the opportunity that they probably should have last season. And I think that's where we see them elevate their game. And I think that's the reason that I'm kind of leaning towards them as
This is a faith pick top 5, is what you're telling me. Like you got to believe. You got to believe in South Carolina.
exactly. Get the Ted Lasso in there. They're gonna have the believe sign, and that is gonna start a fire into them.
Okay. Like I said, I give Lamont Paris a lot of credit for what he did last year. He built an incredibly balanced team and really did a great coaching job. If you followed what was happening in South Carolina, the things he was talking about, the things he said to his players, he did a really good. He's a good motivator, and we'll see what he can churn out there in South Carolina. I am. We're gonna do another top 5 list next week, and we may talk about South Carolina a little bit. All right, so number 3. And this is the other team that you have left off your list, and we're going to talk about this more too. Alabama, I've got in my number 3. Alabama and Arkansas have similar concepts in their front court this season. You got a dynamic, tall 4-man with the ability to stretch the 4 for Alabama. That's Grant Nelson. Nelson kind of mixed at the 5 spot last season at times, but he is a player that truly plays better at the 4 spot. Nelson struggled a little bit from 3 last season, but Year one, year two, this kid's numbers were shooting around 32 to 35% from deep. He shot that, and I think what kind of the problem was is when you're having to mix him into the five, the five spot, those numbers dipped a little bit for Grant Nelson. But he had some great games in the NCAA tournament against UConn and North Carolina. When Nelson gets going, he gets going. He had double doubles against those teams, and I think putting him back at the four spot is going to set him up better this season as well. And the reason they're going to be able to put him at the four spot is because last season the biggest issue was not having Charles Bediako and him going to the NBA a little bit earlier than everyone thought. Yeah, you lost Nick Pringle, who you just mentioned your South Carolina portion. You lost Waggy to Oklahoma. Those were losses, but I don't want to say that they were major losses out of the front court. But bringing in Clifford Omoruyi was a big deal from South Carolina for Alabama, and him coming from Rutgers, having a lot of experience at the power conference level basketball. He was an excellent big man. Is one of the best big man transfers in the country. Good on offense, good on defense. Comes from a program that's played competitive basketball at this level. He has shot. He may have a shot to lead the SEC in block shots. That's what I was trying to get out of my mouth there. He averaged just south of 3 blocks a game at Rutgers last season. Even if there's just a few centimeters better in that front court, Alabama's, I mean, it's going to be tough to deal with them, and the improvement that we've seen just bringing in someone like Clifford Omoruyi, how it just readjusts their front court for this team. Another returner, Jaron Stevenson, very good, could take a big step forward this year for the Tide. He was a solid freshman last year, and he had some big moments in the game, like against North Carolina in the NCAA tournament. He went through the NBA draft process this last season, and we'll see what improvements he's made to his game under the guidance there to get some feedback on his game. Let's see what kind of jump Jaron Stevenson makes. There is a little bit of an unproven factor for Alabama. They got this excellent group of freshmen who are all four of them are in the top 15 incoming freshmen to the SEC. Three of them are in this front court. You got five-star small forward Darian Reed, who is one of the top 15 freshmen coming into the SEC this year. Nas Cunningham is another four-star small forward that Alabama added. Great player, good size for the position, can shoot the three. It has lateral quickness. They got four-star Aiden Sherrill, who is your likely backup at the five spot, and he can also play a little bit of four as well. He's got a versatile set of big man tools. He can run. He's an explosive leaper, and he plays well at the rim. Excellent freshman class to improve this front court as well. This is why Alabama is being so heavily talked about this season, because they improved drastically just by making one move in their front court, and then they've got some really good freshmen to go along with that talent upgrade in that front court. We already knew the back court was good. The front court was the problem and a big part of it. And let's talk about that just a little bit. This is my concern, and I'm going to beat this dead horse a little bit. Defense, defense, defense. Yeah, people are going to point to that all year. But let's talk about one game, and because I love using these one game models, and we did it last year with Mississippi State and Auburn. Last year, Arkansas versus Alabama in Tuscaloosa. Yeah, people are going to point to the fact that Alabama only shot 30% from three in that game, but in that game at home in Tuscaloosa, what went down was that Arkansas led in points of the paint. They were nonstop attacking the rim. It took Nick Pringle and Grant Nelson to step up on the glass for Alabama to pull that game off in overtime. And what was the 103rd offense in the country? You have to be much better on the defensive end and not having somebody who was stopping anyone, because Khalif Battle was driving to the rim the entire game in that one and just putting up easy buckets. And Arkansas was very efficient from two, and that I think you got to be much better if you're Alabama in your front court defense. So there's my beating the dead horse moment on the defense. That is the concern, but I think Clifford Omoruyi helps a lot.
Okay, Alabama's another one of those teams that I had on my draft list, but really what killed their chances of making my top five. Honestly, considered putting them as an honorable mention, but I wasn't sure how many participation trophies we were giving out. Um, so what killed their chances was the inconsistency. Like you said, big glaring issue there was the defense, and for me, that's important for a front court. And I think that is kind of what gears me to put some teams higher than others. And the big thing here, I think, with me is I'm not sold on Grant Nelson yet. while he had some fantastic games, he was very inconsistent throughout the season, in my personal opinion. So I
Played
think
great in the NCAA tournament, though. Played
great in the
great.
NCAA tournament.
He was still, and again, he had to mix in a spot that may have not been his best fit the entire season. We know what he did at North Dakota State, and what the numbers indicate to us is that he's better at the four spot.
Yeah. But still, like I said, not completely sold on him. You've got Jaron Stevenson, who everyone's hoping is going to kind of step up his game now that he's got a little bit more leash to run on. And Clifford Omoruyi, great addition, but like I said, I'm still not sold on Alabama's front court. I mean, I think they're going to be good, but like I said, the inconsistency is what killed it for me.
You are going to end up on a freezing cold take this week or after the at the end of this season. Someone's going to save this clip, and you're going to be all over that one. This is as bad as my Missouri pick a couple or my Tennessee pick a couple of years ago on the first season of this show. I'm just saying, I think Alabama's front court is while it was the weak spot last year, is a drastic improvement this year. And that's why I think Alabama is pretty much on everybody's, one of the pick right now for most people for to win the SEC this year. So um,
I mean, we will see, but
we will see.
and I will eat my words if
I
I'm
think
in.
you're crazy for putting South Carolina over Alabama because that's what you did. And we're going to talk more. We're going to talk more about this.
Follow it up. We've already talked about them, but my number three is Arkansas. Um, like I said, we've got a bunch of transfers coming in that are phenomenal. We've got Trevin Brazil back, who I think a lot of his hindrance last season was kind of caught up in team drama from what I've heard. So I think, kind of a fresh start with a new coach, new team, hopefully get him in the right mindset. And like we mentioned, fantastic transfers, great freshmen coming in. So I'm excited to see what this Arkansas front court can do.
Absolutely. And like we talked about Arkansas, we do agree that Arkansas is a top five for this season. I do agree we both agree there, and I don't think that's just a homer thing. I think the transfers in the class and this thing is put together. I think the back front court is stronger than the back court, honestly.
Yep.
And that's why I've got them ranked higher too. So I'm with you on Arkansas. I think three is legitimate. I think it's a good pick for three. Because I toyed where I was going to put them. I ended up on four. They weren't too far off being my number three either. All right, so my number two is the Florida Gators. So we got to address the two biggest factors. We talked about it a little bit in your honorable mention, but first, Micah Hanlogden was injured in the SEC tournament championship game. He's on medical red shirt for this season. He was an important player for Florida's front court last year, and he probably would have been a bigger factor for this year if it wasn't for the injury. Wishing him a speedy recovery. Then you've also got to replace Tyrese Samuel in your front court this season. Probably one of Florida's most important players last year, just out of college eligibility. You wish you had him back as well. But here is where Florida is. They got a lot of front court depth, guys who look like they can break out this season. They may have an element of unproven about them, but it is small, and the probability weighs that someone is just going to bust through and step up through this front court. And they excelled last season because of what this front court is capable of. Gators are returning Alex Condon and Thomas Haig. Alex Condon had a great freshman campaign, 7.7 points per game, 6.4 rebounds per game, 1.2 assists per game, 1.3 blocks per game. And he got to learn under Tyrese Samuel his entire first season at Florida, and he was splitting time between Samuel and Hanlogden throughout his freshman campaign. He put up numbers like that. I'm very excited to see what year two looks like for his sophomore campaign because this could be a big year for him under Todd Golden. Because he, like I said, he was all SEC freshman team, and for his nation, he was an Australia select team member as well. He got some international praise like Tobe Awaka did last season for Tennessee with Team USA, and Condon played for the Nasei Cup in Japan this offseason. Condon played a little bit of Australian football growing up. He's tough, he's coordinated, and he is physical. Let's see year two. DJ Wagner, Big Z, Aiden Holloway, Jaron Stevenson, Alex Condon, all guys to keep an eye out for a breakout sophomore season. Condon's sophomore campaign is not getting enough preseason talk. I think outside the Florida fan base, someone that needs to be talked about because he's got a very bright future if he's playing like that. And then let's go through the stats on what Florida's doing. Florida led the SEC last year in rebounds per game, defensive rebounds, and defensive rebounds per game. They were second in offensive rebounds per game, rebound differential, offensive rebound percentage, and rebound percentage. They were fourth in the conference in defensive rebound percentage. Last season, Florida was third in the SEC in points per game. And was fourth in the SEC in points per possession. And that wasn't primarily coming from the backcourt. Florida got those numbers because of their ability to create second chance points and their efficiency around the rim and their efficiency taking twos. They were great. That's what kept churning. Remember, this team beat Alabama twice last season, and the reason is because of their ability to play in the front court. And they retained what they needed to retain as a collective, strong group of forwards for this Florida team. Yes, I know Tyrese Samuel is a big loss, but you also got two transfers that are coming in that you are going to attempt to try to replace him with. Ruben Chinyelu, who we mentioned at the front, played at Washington State. During Ty Golden's first off season with the Gators, he was heavily recruiting Chinyelu as a center who played for NBA Academy Africa. Now, nothing on the stat sheet's going to jump off to you about Chinyelu, but some of the stuff underneath the water, for the few minutes that he played, he had 25.4% defensive rebounding rate, which was 44th in the country. He had 9.6 block rate, which is 24th in the country. He has incredible wingspan, good size, and a good paint player. Granted, a lot of the minutes he saw were garbage time and just at the end of games, things like that. So it's easy to see how the numbers might get a little bit inflated, but it's someone that you're taking a gamble with. And you've got another option too if this guy's better, because you got Sam Alexis as coming in from Chattanooga. Alexis averaged just under 11 points per game and over 9 rebounds a night. He was named All SoCon third team last season and All SoCon defensive team. He shot 55% from the field. He recorded 9 double-doubles in 20 games. He is an excellent shot blocker, ranked 37th in the country in block shot rate. Alexis is largely a post-up player, who's also very good in the pick and roll game. So I think you got a lot of guys that are, while there's an unproven element, there should be guys who break through and continue this trend of a very strong front court in Florida for this next season. I like Florida a lot.
So for my number two, I'll be honest, I'm not sure what headspace I was in when I was making my list, but now that I'm looking at them, I don't think they're number two, but we're gonna roll with it.
Okay, we're gonna roll with it. Okay.
We're gonna roll with it. You mentioned them in your honorable mentions. I've got Kentucky. Kind of like South Carolina. You said they're band of misfit toys. That's kind of how I feel about this Kentucky lineup. But I think Mark Pope might be able to do something with them. We got Brandon Garrison. Andrew Carr, I think, is the big highlight here.
That's the highlight. Andrew Carr is the dude. Yeah, for sure.
I think Amari Williams probably needs a little bit more credit than people are giving him. I think he's going to be a better player than expected. May have one of those breakout seasons, like you mentioned. But like I said, I am not really sold as I'm looking through my list, coming up with the rundown. So, I may have an amendment to my top five. But I've got Kentucky at number two. Yesterday's Maddie at least has Kentucky at number two. Today's Maddie is not sure.
Again, the number is 888-820-6684. All right, so tell your loved ones to get the help they need because clearly Maddie was in some kind of headspace for her top five. South Carolina, and then you got. I'm not saying Kentucky doesn't belong in the top five. I just wouldn't have them two. Like that's a little.
I think it was more of one of those like I was doing my, I told you I came up with the draft, a draft copy of it.
I just never moved them down the list.
I think it was like one of those. Have you seen the blind rankings? I think that was kind of how Kentucky made that in. It's like, well, I don't know where to stick them. That's the only spot I have left.
So we agreed on the bottom of our list and we agreed on the top of our list, and we can talk about this together. The Auburn Tigers. Number one. I got a number one. I don't think that should be shocking to anyone. Maddie, should that shock anybody that you've got Auburn number one?
No, I don't think so. So originally I had them lower on my list and realized there's a couple of websites that have incorrect rosters, like the Auburn Tigers official website.
Yeah. It's summer still, and that's probably why. Like there's still teams updating their websites and everything like that. So yeah, I definitely believe there's some incorrect rosters out there. in existence. And I did kind of question a little bit. I didn't blame you when you sent me the initial list, having them number two. But like I was a little bit surprised of it, the order that, that came in when you sent me your initial list and then you texted me. It's like, no, 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 move Auburn number one. So I don't think
I
it should
was
be.
like, I was looking at a completely different team. Let's be right
Absolutely.
here.
It's like, oh, this is not the team. But yeah, so they lost one player in their front court this offseason, and it was pretty significant. That was Jalen Williams, and his ability to stretch the floor certainly had an impact on the offense for Auburn last season. Player that's going to be missed by Auburn fans, now out of eligibility. But what they got back is arguably the best front court in the SEC, and Johni Broome is a big reason why. We've talked about Broome for 3 seasons now. He is a guy that makes Auburn go. And he is a star in their front court. 16.5 points per game, 8.5 rebounds a game, 2.2 assists, 2.2 blocks per game. He was under just under one steal a night, 0.9. So contributing everywhere. Everywhere. And then Broome's got his partner in crime down low with him in Dylan Cardwell. Cardwell is actually the true center, unlike Broome. Broome, if he ever goes to the NBA, will probably play a little bit more of that forward spot at the four. He's got a little bit more versatile in his game. Cardwell is a big body, big man. Didn't play a ton of minutes last year. He was kind of the backup, but he put up 5.3 points per game, just under 4 rebounds tonight, 1.2 assists, and 1.6 blocks per game. Both these front court big men are a tough situation for any team to deal with in the conference. They've been on this team for a minute, and they're both grads, and they've played a lot of college basketball, and they got experience under their belt. Maddie, I mean, when we talk about that pairing, it, what are your thoughts? Because like I don't think it's I don't there's not a lot of teams that have something like that at the five.
Yeah, I mean, I think this is going to be the game that everybody circles because you're going to have, like you said, Johni Broome and Dylan Cardwell, who are both pretty big men, who are going to be in there and dang
Facing
near
off Clifford Omoruyi in the Iron Bowl of basketball for one example. Yeah, that's going to be a tough game.
yeah. So I think, just with those two alone, they have consensus to be number one. But then you look at the lineup behind them. You've got Chad Baker Mazzara, who, like we mentioned,
It's guard, but can go out
Hero's
into
kind
that
of
wing
a
spot.
Swiss Army knife.
Yeah.
And I think you can also put Chad Baker Mazzara in that category. And then Chaney Johnson coming in. Fantastic get for this Auburn team, who I think is going to fit well into the system.
Yeah, absolutely. And the experience is unreal on this Auburn team. Grads everywhere, seniors everywhere, upperclassmen everywhere. Guys who have played a lot of college basketball and played together for a while. They retained a lot on this Auburn team, especially in this front court. From your freshman, we mentioned him last week, but he's going to be out there on that three spot, and that is Howard. Excited to see what he can contribute to Auburn this season. And then they went out and got some depth too in the portal, just to make this backcourt or this front court a little bit stronger. And Jaheim Howard, he's got some NCAA tournament experience, not from his time at SMU, but at his time at, I believe it was Georgia State. He had played the NCAA tournament, so he's got a little bit of experience there as well, and another upperclassman. And like when I mentioned this upperclassman, five upperclassmen in the front court for the Tigers, and four of them are returners. Consistency, continuity, and experience. This is a very, very solid team. Very little unproven points on Auburn's front court, and we've seen it. Now, last season, Auburn was top five in the SEC in total rebounds, defensive rebounds per game. This is the one area, though, in the front court has to kind of get better at this offseason. And this is kind of, we're nitpicking now. We're trying to find these points because this is the number one team. But there's still things to talk about on some issues. They were good, not a great rebounding team. The front court is brick wall strong, but the glass was pretty average for this front court last season. Granted, they missed a lot of shots from their backcourt, or granted, their backcourt didn't miss a lot of shots, and it didn't create all these offensive rebounding opportunities. They were pretty darn efficient. They were top three in the SEC in field goal percentage last year. But let's turn back to, I love doing these one game examples to where you can break things down. Sure, you can have an off game, but this was the wrong stage to do that on. Let's turn back to that Yale Auburn game one more time and what went wrong for them. Terminating your opponent's possessions. Can't let them have second chance points. Yale had just as many offensive rebounds as Auburn did. gotta make sure you clean up that glass on the defensive end, and you gotta kill second chance points, and that's because second chance points are killers in basketball. You can't turn over the basketball either when you get into the front court. Johni Broome led Auburn in turnovers for that game. 4 turnovers for Johni Broome. Yale won the turnover battle +3. So just very important. What happened? Yale won points off the turnover battle and fast break points battle. Got to hold on to the rock, especially when you get it up in that front court. So that's areas of improvement that Auburn's got to step up. Granted, I also might be a little high on Auburn. I may have the number one. Certainly don't doubt that they belong on this list, but losing Jalen Williams was pretty significant for them. But I do think the front court is the engine that makes Auburn go, and I don't expect that to change this season. So out of a confidence rating, definitely number one. There's a possibility there might be better front courts in this conference overall talent wise. But this is definitely the engine for Auburn and probably the most confident front court that I see, a confidence rating in a front court that I see in the SEC is Auburn's got a lot of I've got a lot of confidence in Auburn's front court this season.
Yeah, you mentioned it earlier, experience. Kind of our bread and butter. We like experienced teams, experienced players, and Auburn's got a lot of it. So I think that also factors into them being number one. Um, I mean, people get paid more in their third to fifth year than they will coming in on the ground level. So I think that's true for Auburn, and I think we're going to see a lot of that this season. That experience is going to win them a lot of basketball games.
So we've now talked about 11 of the 16 teams in the conference in our top five list. So there's obviously some teams also we haven't talked about. And next week, let's see if we can't touch on them a little bit more in our next top five list. We're going to do under the radar teams next week, teams that maybe aren't getting enough preseason talk and maybe should be getting some, or teams that maybe that are getting overlooked and might do better than everyone's thinking right now. Maybe some Georgia conversation, maybe some Vanderbilt conversation in the first year with Byington. LSU, Rothstein has the Tigers last in the SEC. We're going to talk about that next week on teams that, are flying a little bit under the radar and kind of maybe getting disrespected or just not getting talked about. So we'll kind of talk about that a little bit and what our kind of thoughts are on those teams. It'll be a very different style list next week and just some more subjective thoughts. So that is wrapping up our front court and back court lists.
Yeah, the next week is going to be great insight to the rest of the teams in the conference. But first, this week the SEC released their conference schedule for this upcoming season, and there are some very good games coming our way. David put his list of the top 5 teams together, or top 5 games together for this conference season.
Yeah, preseason talk and top 5 list: peanut butter and jelly, salt and pepper, bananas and mayonnaise. Yes, I've got the top 5 list put together, and this is going to be an exciting year of basketball. We asked this question on Twitter, and here on the screen you can see the responses. And there's some good ones on here, and a few we didn't include on the list. Example from this Twitter take: Texas and Ole Miss is a great one that we don't have on the list and should be worth an honorable mention. Texas going to play Chris Beard in Oxford after everything that went down in Austin back in 2022. Rodney Terry being an assistant on Beard's staff back at Texas. Great game. That one is on either going to be on January 21st or 22nd at time of recording. We don't know the firm date yet, but that is one of those 2 days is when it should be. But let's hit this list, starting with number one, because I think number one's pretty obvious, and then we can go from there on more of my thinking on that.
All right. At number 1, David, you have Arkansas at Kentucky on February 1st in Lexington. I think it's pretty obvious why this is number 1. I mean, the storyline writes itself.
Yeah, it's unfortunate we only get this game one time next year. Probably the biggest drop ball by the SEC was not making Arkansas and Kentucky a home-and-home series this year. All the offseason talk has been around these two programs. Biggest story in college basketball during the coaching carousel was Calipari going to Arkansas. And here we are with John Calipari coming to Rupp Arena. February 1st is a Saturday game. If College Game Day isn't there, I don't know what to tell you. The environment should be absolutely electric for for that one. DJ Wagner, Aduthiero, Big Z, all transfers from Kentucky, playing for Arkansas now. And this will be a big chance for Mark Pope to make a statement in his first season at Kentucky. Can you imagine how wild the conversation would be with that one? So to me, this is hands down from the storyline alone, the number one game in the SEC right now in the preseason talk for conference play.
Yeah, if I'm picking a game I'm traveling to, it's going to be this one. We'll see
Sold out.
what those ticket prices are when it comes to it and if that's a possibility. But if I can't be there, I'm definitely going to be watching it.
Rupp's normally a little bit more affordable, even though like Bud and Rupp aren't too, different size wise. I Arkansas basketball tends to just be more expensive, and I've looked at Rupp tickets before and Tennessee tickets because those are like the comparable arena sizes, and those two tend to be cheaper than Arkansas. We got a ticket problem in Fayetteville.
For sure. All right. And then on March 8th, David, you've got the Iron Bowl of basketball picked out at number 2. Alabama heading to Neville to face the Jungle.
If preseason predictions hold, this game might determine the winner of the SEC regular season. This one also should be very obvious to a lot of people. Rivalry game, two programs that have been on the rise in college basketball over the last decade. There's going to be a big man fight under the basket between Broome and Amori. CBM takes on Mark Sears. Who's the better freshman guard, Pettiford or Phelan? Most everyone's preseason number 1 and number 2 in this conference. At worst, I've seen it number 1 and number 3. This is a big time basketball game in this conference. 2020, they split this series. 2021, Alabama wins both of them. 2022, Auburn wins both matchups. 2023, Auburn comes back and sweeps the series. 2024, they split the series. If you think you know how this game is going to go, I wouldn't recommend placing a bet regardless. Throw out KenPom. It's Auburn and Alabama. There might be a championship on the line on the final day of the regular season of basketball. Give the people what they want, a showdown for the final game of the regular season. This one could be huge. So that one definitely gets circled right now. And regardless, if it doesn't turn out to be the championship game, that's going to be a heck of a basketball game because that one delivers very often.
Definitely. Moving on to another rivalry. David, you have Texas A&M. We haven't seen this matchup since 2019.
Yeah, I'm an Arkansas fan. We're rivals with Texas, but we kind of know we're the number 3 or number 4 rival with Texas in priority. But how in the world have we seen Arkansas play Texas as many times as we've seen Texas A&M play Texas since they left the Big 12? And under the exact same circumstances, 2 neutral site games. That's all we've got between the Aggies and the Longhorns since 2012. Monday, February 6th, 2012 in College Station. That was the last time. The drought ends this year. First time one of these two have visited the other's house since that 2012 season. Longhorns have to go to Rupp Arena, and Buzz and the boys are going to be ready for that one. Let me drop some names for you. Wade Taylor, Hayden Hefner, Jalen Lee, Manny Obaseki, Zurich Phelps, all kids from the great state. You think those kids were recruited by Texas? You think those kids grew up watching the Longhorns get all the love in that state? It's going to be bumping in the Lone Star State on January 4th. School may be out, but the rivalry is back on. That's going to be a great game to watch. A return of a big, big rivalry in college sports.
Yeah, keeping the Longhorn State bumping. A couple of days after that, you've got another game happening in Texas. This time, it's in the Moody Center in Austin. Tell us about your number 3 game, David. Tennessee at Texas.
Yeah, I think this is where we get a little bit more opinion based. Your opinion versus my opinion, respectively. I think there's a few games you could put 4 or 5. Our honorable mention between Ole Miss and Texas is also a good one to talk about, like I said. But I'm going Rick Barnes' return to Austin. Rick Barnes, of course, led Texas to some of the big high points in the program history. 3 regular season Big 12 conference titles with the Longhorns, a trip to the Final Four in 2003, coach 4-time gold medalist Mr. Team USA, Kevin Durant there, 402 wins deep in the heart of Texas. No one has won more games for the Longhorns, and he is arguably the greatest coach in Texas basketball history. Almost 200 more wins than the great Tommy Penders. The only coach to take the Longhorns to the Final Four in the modern era. We saw this game twice in the Big 12 SEC Challenge, split the series. Last time Tennessee went down to Austin, they lost by a single point. But Tennessee has taken the last 2 games in this series, winning at home in Knoxville and in the NCAA tournament last year. But in the series since 1952, no team has ever won 3 games in a row. Will it be a home win against your former coach for the Longhorns, or will Tennessee be the first team to win three in a row? I think that's a really exciting one with the Rick Barnes storyline and it being a conference game now with a lot of orange in the stadium.
For sure. So your number five game, David, you said this one's probably going to be the most debatable, and if you're not belonging to a fan base involved in this storyline, probably not even considering it.
Yeah, for my number five game, I have Missouri at Arkansas on February 22nd. It's not the State Farm's Great Value Billabong Surfboard Star Wars Battlefront 2 corporate sponsorship game or anything like that to do with it on why this is a good one. As a millennial Arkansas fan, I could care less about the Missouri game. I care about it as much as playing South Carolina. And I don't think that's ever going to register with fans of our generation like it probably will with Gen Z or future kids. This game might matter more to them in the future when it's more well established, but that's not what this is. This year's a little bit different, and the Fayetteville game is intriguing, and that's because of Honor Boating. Now, Boating was the number one recruit coming out of Arkansas last year, according to 24/7 Sports. Little Rock Central kid, which is a big-time high school program in this state. Arkansas recruits don't normally go out of state unless it's Kentucky or a big-time program. Example, Malik Monk. Khalil Ware was probably the biggest one recently, not coming to Arkansas, and Arkansas still got Nick Smith Jr. in that class. Ware went to Oregon, which is in the NIL era, Nike puts a lot of money into that program. So big NIL program there, and that may be like the new trend also we see with kids leaving the state. But normally the point is Arkansas kids stay in Arkansas. So this is very, very different. Boating went to Missouri over Arkansas. And there was some very loud discussion about Musselman's ability to recruit in state after that, which was nuts because he had taken three of the top four Arkansas players in 2022 and the top two plus Moses Moody in 2020. But Bowdoin goes to Missouri as their number one recruit and the number five ranked recruiting class in the country. And he's going to have to go to Bud Walton. And this is an extremely talented class, also accompanied by the number 13 transfer class in the country. He's going to be in his home state against what looks like a promising Arkansas team and in a building Missouri hasn't won in since 2021, has only won at twice since joining the SEC, has only won at twice in the history of the arena in 17 tries, has lost 8 of the last 10 meetings in this series. But Missouri might be flying under the radar, and they might have the team pull off what could be the biggest win in the Series 62 game history. Additionally, Missouri has never beaten John Calipari in Cal's home arena and has beaten him only one time away from Columbia. That was in 2009 against Memphis in the Sweet 16. The only time it's happened. If Missouri is a sleeper team in the SEC, with their talent and the transfers they could be, keep an eye on this game.
So let's back up a little bit here. You're not picking this as an Arkansas top five game, so to speak.
Yeah, it's like 25% an Arkansas storyline, but it's got the potential to be a historic game in Missouri's basketball history if they pulled this out. School all-timer potentially. Picture it, Missouri getting picked as far back as they are here at the start of the season in the SEC. They might be like coming into this game projected at a 9 seed or something like that with only 4 weeks left in the SEC regular season. Won't they make the tournament kind of situation going on and talk up against a Hall of Fame coach, a top 25 all-time program, one that you don't particularly care for very much, and one of the toughest places to play in college basketball. You got a kid from that state, nobody's picking you to win there. Boom. Next thing you know, you're a top 24, top 28 team in the tournament, walking out with a Q1A victory. Missouri has done stuff like that in the past. They did it to Kansas before. It's not out of the realm of possibility that we see something like this and what might be one of the craziest games we've seen in this history of this series. So like this has the potential to be the most explosive game in the Missouri Arkansas basketball series so far. So I'm interested in this one. I think it has the potential to have some craziness happen. And if it goes Missouri's favor, huge win. One of the best wins they've had probably outside of Columbia since they've come to the SEC, at least in modern thinking. Like I can't think another one that propped up like probably beating Kentucky 2 years ago was a big win. This would be somewhere in that ballpark here in recent history if they pulled this one out.
Yeah, definitely a game to keep on the radar. Like you said, there's going to be a lot of interesting takes going into that one, especially when you're kind of looking at the stakes of possibly recruiting in the future.
It's a big game. So, Maddie, what games do you have on the list?
So after picking through the scraps that you left me, David,
There's some good.
I've which there were still good games on the schedule, not to, take away from this season. But one that I'm really interested in is the newcomers of the SEC. You got Texas versus Oklahoma, Red River Red River rivalry. I can't talk.
Alliteration.
It's a good thing I'm not part of Texas or Oklahoma because I would never be able to get that out. It's going to be in action on the basketball court. Obviously, a legendary rivalry coming into the SEC. I think this one's going to be a huge boost to the conference with the rivalries that are already in play. So I think that'll be a fun one to watch, even if one of the teams we haven't mentioned because they're not particularly supposed to be the best. It's a rivalry game. It's going to be interesting either way.
I do agree with that. Oklahoma, it's a conversation upon itself. It's weird because like unlike football, I don't think that this is the best that either of these programs have been, and it's not a shot at them. I just think that it's the wrong timing for both these programs. But definitely the addition of a huge rivalry is something to look into, and I think that's going to be fun. And even if this doesn't pan out this year, we're going to get this game for a while because both these programs have been consistently good at some, at streaks at time. Texas has been, a little bit more rock steady. Oklahoma's had years where they have exploded and been among the best in college basketball. So definitely a great addition to this conference is that rivalry game.
Yeah, and I think, with the transition to the SEC, I think that brings in a little bit more recruiting as basketball's becoming more relevant.
Yeah.
Uh, Another game that I think is going to be a good one to watch is going to be Florida versus Tennessee. We've mentioned both of them in our list over the past couple of weeks. Talked about, them and transfer portal episodes in, incoming freshmen. Two very good teams that will be good, but will be very different from their teams of the past. Obviously, both considered in our top five lists in some capacity. They're obviously talented, but I'm interested to see the matchup based off of the changes around these teams.
Yeah, that one's gonna be without Dalton Connect, this next season or the other way. Florida's really on the upswing, and they feel like a program that's going back toward where they want to be. Maybe not Billy Donovan level yet, but like definitely moving in the right direction. And Florida versus Tennessee looks like a very promising game there, and two teams that have a bit of a rivalry between each other. So this will be very promising on what's a rising program right now for Florida, trying to get back to where they typically where they have been, which is among the best in the SEC, and Tennessee, who has been among the best in the SEC for the last several years. This is going to be fun. That one's going to be fun. I think over even this one will continue to grow. The direction that Todd Golden's taken Florida over the next couple of years, if Tennessee maintains where they are right now. So that this game also one that even if it doesn't maybe pan out this season, keep working for this one over the next couple of years.
Yeah, I think, I kind of wanted to put in there two teams that might possibly be fighting for relevancy. I don't think
Yeah,
that's going to be the case. I think they're both going to be relevant
very
teams,
relevant.
but I think it's going to be one of those, hey, we're still here and we need to prove it. And this is going to be one of those games that segue either into finishing up a really strong season or possibly trending back down.
Yeah, and both these teams should be top eight, like somewhere in the top eight in worst circumstances. Like that should be where it ends up. I mean, worst circumstances we've learned from Arkansas last year means 10th. But like, for a team, that's got talent. But like point is 10th, 11th for Arkansas, really. But like point is that theoretically the floor should be for these teams somewhere, 8, 9. For both these teams. So it should be a very relevant big time basketball game between Florida and Tennessee. So, even if things go south, it still looks like a pretty darn good game. So I like that pick. I think that's going to be a good game. All right. So guys, thank you so much for watching. We appreciate it. We know we went a little bit long this week. We'll see how I cut it down for the edit this week. Me and Maddie, it's an early morning one for us recording on Saturday. So it's been a little bit, weird. Coffee's just now hitting my system. Trying to open up the whole weekend to both of us. But guys, thank you so much for watching. If you have not already, Please like and subscribe. We will continue to talk our off-season content as we go through. There are little videos, about 5 minute, 10 minute videos for you guys to check out on transfer portal and incoming freshmen to the SEC, all coming out through the course. And then next week, so the plan is next week we are going to do a top five list on our under the radar teams. We'll keep that short and sweet. That'll be a shorter top five list. And then me and Maddie are going to be playing our fantasy draft as we try to more or less, this should be like a top 16 list of players coming into the SEC, but we're going to pick a fantasy team for both of us, so to speak, and try to build it off of like using NBA fantasy points. And we're going to see if we can't build a roster of fantasy players with some set rules and parameters to kind of introduce everybody to who we think might be the top 16 players in the conference for next season. So, guys, if you're not already, please like and subscribe to the channel, and we'll catch you guys next week.
Thanks, guys. Have a good week.